Hey, this is a response video to Math Fails, and his video, Venom Fang X is right, and I think there is some misunderstanding amongst the user comments about what you were saying exactly. Although I think I generally agree. Great news is what you're talking about is what Ken Wilber's always talking about, and what integral theory is always trying to stress, which is that everybody is partially right. Everybody's right to some degree. The reason why we develop things such as religion and hierarchy and mythic structures of belief, basically why we create more dogmatic societies, is because evolutionarily speaking, we had a point in our existence where these things were the latest development. Mythic societies were at some point where we were all at. Just as at some point we started to develop computer technology and all this, and now we're seeing this future, society that's basically all on the web. That will one day be seen as something that's, I guess you could say, backwards, and who knows what's going to come later on. But for the most part, the structures of thought that we invented and that evolved over time, because you have to think of it this way: societies evolve like people do, and like biological organisms do. So the structures that were developed, the thinking structures, and the institutions that follow, they're all part of this complex interrelated process that we've evolved to survive and to reproduce society to the next generation, And all this really means is that at some point we had mythical ideas, right and wrong, true, untrue, structures that bound society together and then made it possible to develop more societies. It didn't necessarily have to go the way it did, but a more simple, structured, rigorous society where rules are more important than understanding any kind of psychological depth or complexity, it had its point in our evolution, because we're talking about the evolution of ideas and of cultures and traditions, and we can't expect an ancient society to be able to just go ahead and have Enlightenment ideals. I know what you might be thinking. Well, what about the Greeks, etc.? You have to think in terms of a large society, a society like today, or something like today. It takes a while to get to this point. Greeks had some ideas, but they also had some other things that we would completely dislike and completely disagree with. Their mentality was very different. And although some ideas were existent at the time, ideas that we may have picked up on during the Renaissance, such as the Enlightenment principles, such as focusing on rational thinking, these things must be put into context of how they evolved, and not necessarily as these universal ideas that these idiots in the past should have gotten. So all of these ancient traditions and these philosophies had a lot of things that we wouldn't have, or the Enlightenment thinkers wouldn't have. Even if the Enlightenment thinkers got the idea of empirical research and science from some of the schools of thought in, say, ancient Greece, it's a very complex process. Everything's very interconnected with this. And I know Math Fails was speaking about the evolutionary, more vertical dimension to it, higher, or might want to say deeper levels of understanding. Understanding where people came from at a particular point in history and why they thought what they thought can also help us understand its limitations and the need for transcendence. But we can't necessarily attack. We should critique people like, let's say, Venom Fang X, who are still portraying this worldview that had a point and had a time, and it has a relevance to people today, to some people today. And there are various reasons why some old structures of thought stick around in modern times, and it's very complex. But there's a reasoning for it, and if we can understand where they're coming from, and that's why Math Fails was saying, he's right to some degree. Venom Fang is right. The fundamentalists are right, but only partially correct. Where they're coming from, in the degree that they had to do what they had to do at that time, or they had to think literally in order to bind society together, that sort of thing was necessary because there were no other better options, and at the time this was a very good option. To them, comparing it to our standards, of course we would be like, these guys are doing this, they're oppressing their people, they're mutilating genitals, like, these things are so ridiculous, and they are. And but by us being able to say that, we're also implying that maybe there's something beyond relative thought. Maybe there are ways to understand things deeper. Ethics, values, just awareness of other people and feelings, and our sense of awareness has evolved, has become more complex. It doesn't mean as human biological beings some are advanced and others aren't. These are more structures of thought. These are ways societies can bind together, and ways people can think. As a sociologist, you're always studying this sort of stuff, how people can formulate a worldview, and that's what really it comes down to, the formulation of a worldview. And all of this messy process is very different. It's very, very non-linear, very relative in all this, but there are, at the same point, intensifications, greater understanding, more complex faculties of awareness that a society as an organism, you could say, or a culture as a... if you see a culture as an organism, you can see how a culture can evolve, and how there could be subcultures and sub-things that stay in a particular mental point of view, not because they can't go beyond, but there are particular reasons what keeps them there. So, historically speaking, you can defend what happened, not that it is right or wrong, but that it had its time and its place during our development. But speaking of these things still existing in the current day, there are societies that still have this, that still are going through processes, and at the same time, there are reasons why societies are stuck at a particular level, and maybe they do necessarily need to go beyond it, and that's when we should critique them. We should critique Venom Fan X, try to promote more scientific thinking, more open-minded thinking, but we have to understand there are natural processes at work here, and natural evolution of ideas, of societies, of traditions. It's a very messy process, but nevertheless, very natural. And yeah, so Venom Fang X is right to some degree. Everybody's partially right. Ken Wilber. Good guy. Check him out.